They became a real nightmare for the Japanese fleet during World War II. They gathered in packs and individually sent enemy tankers, large warships, and submarines to the depths. In the city of Moscow, Oklahoma, in the city's memorial park dedicated to World War II, stands one of such heroes, the submarine Batfish. 3 sunken submarines in 76 hours. The concept of a squadron submarine was developed in the U.S. Navy since the 1920s, based on the experience of World War I. Initially, such submarines were to interact with the main surface forces, conduct long-range reconnaissance, and, of course, inflict maximum losses on the approaching enemy before the start of the general battle of large artillery ships. The most important characteristics at the time were high surface speed, cruising range, autonomy, and powerful armament. The idea of a squadron submarine and the desire to produce them in large quantities appeared more than 10 years before it actually happened. They wanted to build essentially a conveyor belt to assemble submarines as quickly as possible and send them into the ocean to fight. In the 1930s, the U.S. Navy successively adopted several series of submarines. By the beginning of the war, based on their operation experience, the optimal balance of tactical and technical elements was found. In 1941, the United States began mass production of the so-called Balao-class submarines. The first of them were the Balao-class submarine cruisers. The project was modified in parallel with the construction, and this is how a new type of American submarine cruiser, Balao, emerged. The main difference was the steel used to build the hull, which transitioned from 14 mm to 22 mm thickness. High-strength steel of a new grade was also used. Thanks to this, Balao can dive deeper than Gato. During tests, it could reach 120 meters compared to Gato's 90 meters. We know that the Batfish and other Balaos could dive significantly deeper. With the United States entering the war, it became clear that the previous concept of using cruiser submarines was not suitable. Fortunately, their tactical and technical elements were well suited for the new role of combat on the extensive Japanese maritime communications in the Pacific Theater of Operations. The United States Shipbuilding Management Military Program, starting in 1942, provided for the introduction of 30 submarines into the fleet annually, so that, taking into account inevitable losses, in 4 years, the number of submarines would be brought to 150 units. This is precisely what was required to effectively solve the tasks at hand. Our country, the United States, was very skillful at producing things. Therefore, we quickly converted our economy to military rails. The reason why so many Balaos were built so quickly lies in the fact that we could direct all labor resources to the production of military equipment. So there were plenty of people. Moreover, some sailors assigned to the Batfish helped build the boat when it was not yet completed. The first U.S. Navy submarine that entered service in 1900 was named after its inventor, Holland. Then, American submarines were given literal digit designations. But in the early 1930s, submarines began to be named after fish and other marine creatures. You probably know that we have a catfish submarine, which is a predatory but tasty fish. There is also barboos and many other good fish. If you've never seen the Batfish Sea Bat, it looks like the Joker from the first good Batman, a fish that hides in the water column and waits for its prey to swim from above to eat it. It's very similar to the tactics of submarines in World War II. The tactical and technical characteristics of the Batfish submarine as of 1943, length 94 meters, width just over 8 meters, draft an average of over 5 meters, underwater displacement 2,415 tons. The submarine had a double hull with a maximum diameter of almost 5 meters, and the thickness of the pressure hull was over 22 millimeters. The armament included the Mark 17 127mm caliber deck gun, Bofors 40mm caliber anti-aircraft guns, and Oerlikon 20mm caliber anti-aircraft guns. When the American submariners needed to dive, they had 30 to 40 seconds to descend from the deck into the submarine and get ready for battle. During this time, the sailors had to bring the anti-aircraft guns and prepare them for action. The crew was trained so they could descend into the submarine within 10 seconds. They literally jumped through the hatch and rushed to their positions. The torpedo armament consisted of 10 torpedo tubes, 6 forward and 4 aft. The submarine carried 24 electric torpedoes of the Mark 18 type with a caliber of 533 millimeters. The aft torpedo room, which housed 1/3 of all torpedoes on the submarine, was where torpedoes were launched from these 4 tubes. This was 2 less than in the forward torpedo room. Loading a torpedo was a relatively simple process. You take a torpedo loader and attach the notches on the end to the screw, then pass a rope through the block and thread it through the hole. After that, you manually push the torpedo right into the tube. Once the torpedo is in the tube, you close it and introduce compressed air from the tanks through these pipes, which launches the torpedo. The power plant of the submarine included 4 diesel engines, Fairbanks Morse, with a total power of 5,400 horsepower, and 4 General Electric motors with a power of 2,750 horsepower each. There were 2 groups of battery cells, 126 elements in each. The forward battery compartment was located directly below the officer's mess. Half of the 252 batteries on the submarine were in this compartment, arranged under the officers' tables and the crew's bunks because, in case of malfunctions, they produced such toxic gases as hydrogen and nitrogen in high concentrations, which were also explosive. When this compartment was fully loaded with batteries, the entire space between them and the ceiling was so tight that one could only crawl. Some crew members crawled from battery to battery, checking them for gases. The maximum surface speed was about 20 knots, and the maximum submerged speed was around 9 knots. The range of travel in the surface position was 11,000 miles at a speed of 10 knots, and in the submerged position, it was 96 miles at a speed of 2 knots. The autonomy of the submarine was 60 days. The Batfish submarine became part of the U.S. Navy on August 21, 1943. If you look at the plaque, it reads Batfish 194. What does it mean? It means that they intended to write the year 1940, but they were not sure about the exact year, so they left it blank. The construction of Batfish began at the end of 1942 and was completed in 1943. They were in such a hurry to send the submarine into battle against the Japanese that they didn't inscribe the last digit. These submarines were called Cadillacs among the submarines because they had all the latest and best equipment. They only lacked cruise control. So our submarines far surpassed Japanese ones in terms of technology. For example, they upgraded something on Batfish almost every time it was in a different port between missions. Of course, for each new device or system, they had to train at least 2 people to operate them. One of the simplest yet effective devices for detecting the enemy underwater was the hydrophone. A hydrophone is essentially a passive sonar, a microphone that allows you to listen to the ocean around you. An experienced hydroacoustic operator could distinguish the enemy and say there is an enemy ship out there. Then you would determine the characteristics of sound, such as how far one revolution of the propeller moves the target, can be used to determine the enemy's speed. Let's say one revolution of the propeller moves at 36 inches. This means one revolution of the propeller moves at 3 feet. You can consider these measurements over a certain unit of time and thus calculate the enemy's speed. Submariners counted the number of revolutions over a specific time unit, allowing them to perform calculations involving mathematics, which some of us have since forgotten, to say, okay, the target is moving at this many knots. When you know the speed of your own vessel and the speed of the enemy vessel, you can plot an intercept course for firing. This is one of the advantages of the hydrophone. Another instrument used for determining the distance to the target and its movement parameters on submarines was the sonar, which served as an alternative to the periscope. The sonar station had 2 operators working simultaneously. One attempted to detect sounds such as propeller noises and explosions, while the other read the information from the sonar screens. The data collected were sent to the control room, where officers analyzed it and made decisions on further actions. The control room was essentially the nerve center of the submarine, housing between 10 to 12 crew members. Managing torpedo launches, submerging, and surfacing were all coordinated from this central location. One of the essential aspects of underwater operations is maintaining silence. Whether tracking a target or evading the enemy, a submarine must be absolutely silent. If the enemy's sonar detects the submarine, it provides a more accurate location for dropping depth charges. In 1943, a radar station of type SJ-1 was introduced on board, and the following year, the submarine started using signal detection stations. This allowed enemy vessels to be identified based on the emissions of their radars. Initially, they didn't fully trust this technology. It was somewhat akin to saying, if we can't trust our own eyes, who can we trust? However, they started using radar, maintaining radar depth with the radar antenna above the water surface, especially in poor visibility conditions. At night or during bad weather, or just when it was dark, radar was the only means to see anything. Several months before the start of World War II in the Pacific, it became clear that the effectiveness of American submarine torpedoes was extremely low. This was due to the technical imperfections in the American torpedoes. In particular, the contact detonators were unreliable, and instead of detonating the charge, they often bent. Additionally, the torpedoes were equipped with magnetic detonators, which theoretically allowed them to damage a target even without a direct hit. The torpedo was supposed to explode under the enemy ship and break its keel in half. However, all of this worked poorly. There were even cases in the history of the Batfish when they fired a torpedo and heard only a thud. How many times can you hit a target with non-functioning torpedoes before you get sunk yourself? Towards the end of the summer in 1943, the Mark 18 torpedo was introduced. It was the first American electric torpedo, modeled after the German Mark 18. It left no visible trace of bubbles on the water surface. Moreover, it was more technologically advanced and cheaper. The Mark 18 gas torpedo was more effective, but it also had problems. Remember the submarine tank? They fired a Mark 18 torpedo, and a system malfunction occurred. The torpedo made a circular turn and destroyed its own belly. That's what I call the worst day ever. Mark 18 torpedoes operated on batteries, which were cheaper to produce but needed recharging. When you recharge the battery, it produces gaseous hydrogen. If, for some reason, the hydrogen exhaust system fails and you decide to smoke, you'll just blow up, and nobody would like that. The issue with torpedoes became so acute that in the summer of 1943, the commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, Admiral Nimitz, issued an order to remove magnetic detonators from all torpedoes. However, soon both types of torpedoes, Mark 14 and Mark 18, were improved. Once the Mark 18 was perfected and put into service in 1943, it became a real blessing for submariners. Around 1945, the Batfish embarked on another combat patrol. The submarine crew once again appreciated all the advantages of their armament and equipment. The radar detected a target at 6 miles, and the hunt began. On a dark, moonless night, the Batfish approached the presumed enemy, fired 4 torpedoes, all of which missed. After reloading the torpedo tubes and increasing the submarine's speed, they positioned themselves successfully. The second torpedo hit, and the third passed right over the spot where the enemy submarine had sunk. Meanwhile, the first torpedo failed to leave the bow tube. The captain yelled, "Fire that torpedo! Fire that torpedo!" In the bow compartment, torpedo man Virgil Lawrence responded, "I'm trying, but it's stuck. What can I do?" Then he remembered what he had been taught. To eject the torpedo from the tube, he increased the compressed air pressure to 42 kg per square centimeter, said a short prayer, and with a bang, the torpedo was released. The shockwave slightly pushed the submarine backward, and everyone cheered. They had survived this chase. The Batfish approached the location of the sunken Japanese submarine, and they turned on their searchlight to look for debris and survivors. However, when it started to get light in the sky, Japanese planes appeared. The Batfish dove beneath the surface again. On the evening of February 11th, the Americans once again detected the enemy radar signal. When they caught the signal from the first submarine, everything was clear. When the second one appeared, our guys couldn't believe it. The frequency was 157, indicating it was a Japanese submarine. They even double-checked to make sure it wasn't one of their own. However, it was indeed a Japanese submarine, and they followed it. What was most surprising was that the enemy seemed not to notice them. The captain decided to attack again in surface position and from as close as possible. However, the enemy unexpectedly started diving. They had been detected because the enemy heard them, and their equipment was better than ours, but the enemy didn't realize it. So, our guys just waited and listened. After about 20 minutes, the sonar reported hearing the sound of ballast tanks being blown. A minute later, the target was detected. The Batfish submerged under the enemy's radar antenna to maintain contact. At 800 meters, 4 torpedoes were launched from the bow tubes. The silence was shattered by a powerful explosion. And then, just one day later, on the 158th and 153rd, they again intercepted a radar signal at the right frequency. Another Japanese submarine. Our guys just couldn't believe their eyes. It was becoming routine for them, just another day at work, destroying Japanese submarines. They had only 2 torpedoes left in the bow compartment, and as you know, firing from the stern tubes is more complicated than from the bow. Of course, the guys in the stern were eager, let us fight, let us fight. They also wanted to participate. Everyone congratulated them, and they received official thanks. It was just another day at the office, destroying Japanese submarines. Never before had 3 sunken submarines been encountered in 76 hours. If you were to ask the crew members, they'd say it was all due to luck and some serious skills. But if you talk to historians and assess the situation, it was a combination of luck and excellent skills. In the final days of World War II, the crew of the Batfish made a pact. Following an old maritime tradition, the crew purchased a bottle, and they agreed that the last surviving member would drink it in memory of their fallen comrades. It's a very touching and beautiful tradition. However, when they made this agreement at the age of 20 or 19, they couldn't have imagined that they might live to be 90 years old. In this way, the bottle from the first crew of our submarine from World War II was opened about 7 years ago. We have a bottle from a very famous company in America, and on the bottle is the inscription to the crew of the submarine. It's a beautiful bottle, and we keep it as an exhibit until the last Korean War veterans want to drink it. The role of American submarines in the Pacific Ocean during World War II is difficult to overstate. They virtually destroyed the Japanese tanker fleet, depriving the enemy of vital fuel. From July to August 1945, submarines focused on rescuing pilots of planes shot down over the ocean. During World War II, in the Pacific Ocean, the Americans lost 52 submarines out of 280, and about 3,500 sailors did not return home. Of course, when you tell people about this, they may say, it's not that many. But what would be considered a lot then? Moreover, it should be taken into account that there were only about 24,000 of our submariners who fought in the war. This means that 1 in every 5 sailors who served on submarines during the war died. No one on board the Batfish lost their life, and this is very important. Not all submarines can boast of this. In my opinion, this is the greatest achievement of the Batfish, that no one perished on it. You must understand that no one has such strong camaraderie. I'm sure many will say, you know, we fought side by side in the trenches. No, when you are inside a metal can beneath the sea for 65 consecutive days, and at any moment, your life can be cut short, that's when the bonds of brotherhood are formed. In the early 1970s, the Oklahoma Submarine Veterans Association succeeded in obtaining one of the decommissioned Navy submarines to commemorate their submariner comrades. They chose the Batfish, and it remained to transport it to the Oklahoma State Memorial Park. The Batfish was towed on 6 barges along the Mississippi River to the Arkansas River. Every time they encountered a dam along the way, they had to lock the transport. Every time they encountered a bridge, the submarine barely cleared the lower part. In Little Rock, there was a bridge under which the submarine couldn't pass. They were sure they would have to cut off the periscope stanchions. We won't be able to pass under this bridge, they said. However, the Council of Veterans did not want to cut off any part of the submarine. They studied the situation and called in military engineers. "Guys, we're just about 5 centimeters short to pass under the bridge," they said. The engineers slightly lowered the water level, and that was enough to barely fit under the bridge. It's simply amazing. One of the reasons why the Batfish is now located where it is was due to Mother Nature. Flooding raised the level of the river significantly. Builders dug a canal in the dry dock, filled it with water, and began excavating the basins with excavators. All these works took about a month and a half. 2 cranes worked to their limits to place the Batfish precisely, with a tugboat supporting the stern. They set the boat directly on the ground. It was a breathtaking sight, and people gathered to watch because you don't see something like this every day. The Military Memorial Park in Muskogee, Oklahoma, became the final resting place for the submarine. In May 1973, the Batfish officially became a museum ship and has been open to visitors year-round.
Smoke generator started. Torpedoes to starboard. Smoke screen set. Smoke generator started. Smoke screen set. Torpedoes, dead ahead. Torpedoes, direct front. Our team has taken the lead. Victory is in sight. Our victory is in sight.